There was a moment where I felt like the way I watched movies had changed. I caught myself analyzing them as I was watching, thinking about whether it was a 4 or 5 star film, where it ranked compared to other things I'd seen that month, already forming a take and thinking about the cleverest way I could sum it up in one line for people who didn't ask. I wasn't getting lost in movies the way I used to. I wasn't fully pulled into the story or immersed in the world, and I started to realize I'd lost the simple, emotional, instinctive kind of movie watching that made me fall in love with them in the first place. At some point, it felt like I'd stopped watching movies for myself and started performing my taste through them. I wanted to make this video to unpack how cinephile spaces like film school, Letterboxd, and film Twitter can shape not just what we watch, but how we watch them. I want to talk about how that influence can change our relationship to movies in ways that are hard to notice. And I want to share what's helped me start reconnecting with movies in a way that feels honest, present, and personal. Most people fall in love with movies because of how they make them feel. Even if they don't know the language for it, they're reacting to the edit, the lighting, the score. It's not about identifying the technique, it's about being moved by it. But if you spend enough time in film school or online film circles, you start to internalize a more selective definition of what makes a movie good. Emotion still matters, but only if it's the right kind. Subtle is better than sentimental. Ambiguity is better than clarity. Restraint is better than obvious emotion. Familiar, accessible stories start to get looked down upon, and it becomes less about joy or comfort and more about complexity and craft. The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called this cultural capital. It's the idea that taste is tied to status. The more refined your taste, the more credibility or social value you're perceived to have. And this plays out constantly in film culture. A Marvel fan and a Tarkovsky fan can both love movies, but only one of them is going to be taken seriously in most cinephile circles. In film school, no one tells you what to like, but you start to pick up on the cues. You notice which films get praised, which directors get quoted, which opinions earn respect. And you're surrounded by people who take movies seriously, which can be amazing. But that seriousness comes with a kind of snobbery. Certain movies are too predictable, too commercial, too broad. Even if no one says it outright, there's this unspoken hierarchy, like some films just aren't worth taking seriously. And over time, it's easy to internalize that. And when you start watching certain movies through that critical lens, picking apart what feels predictable, what could have been written better, what makes it feel lesser, it gets harder to enjoy them for what they are. You're not reacting from instinct anymore, you're reacting from everything you've learned about what's not supposed to be good. But what if joy isn't a guilty pleasure? What if comfort and familiarity are legitimate cinematic values? Letterboxd is a great platform in many ways. It encourages discovery, discussion, connection, but it also turns watching movies into a kind of performance. Your top 4 can start to feel like a curated identity, a mini portfolio of taste. You start wondering, what does this say about me? Is it too obvious, too obscure, too safe? I remember revisiting my own top 4 and realizing I wasn't just choosing what I loved. I was also thinking about what looked good. I thought about which ones were critically respected, I paid attention to average scores, I filtered for variety, for balance, and I did love all of those films, but I could feel myself curating and shaping a version of my taste that felt impressive. Even when you're being genuine, visibility changes behavior. Because on Letterboxd, your ratings, your reviews, and logs are public. You become hyper aware of how your taste is being seen. A 2023 article in Hunger magazine called it the gamification of cinephilia. Watching becomes about logging, ranking, and curating. Users even report a kind of low-grade anxiety over their stats. Have I watched enough this year? Do I need to diversify my favorites? It stops being a diary and starts feeling like a resume. The irony is that in trying to prove how much you love film, you start engaging with it less emotionally and more strategically. Film school trains you to see differently. You start to notice things you used to overlook, like the way a shot is composed, how a cut creates meaning, how dialogue plays off subtext. Everything becomes something to analyze. And that training is valuable, but it also rewires how you watch. Your brain builds habits of judgment, often subconsciously. It sharpens your understanding and appreciation, but it can narrow your response and flatten feeling. And instead of being pulled into a story, you hover above it, assessing, anticipating, comparing. And when you layer in Letterboxd or discourse culture, that internal critic gets louder. You start pre-writing takes in your head before the credits roll. This psychologist's theory of flow, which is that immersive, joyful state of full engagement, depends on losing self-awareness. But in cinephile culture, self-awareness becomes the lens. You're no longer just watching, you're curating your relationship to what you've watched. Ironically, some of my most profound film moments have come from using that analytical lens. When it's in service of deeper engagement and not performance, critique can bring you closer to the emotional core of a film. In that sense, film school doesn't ruin movies, but it can crowd out the conditions that made you love them in the first place. Now, to be fair, there are valid reasons many of us struggle to connect with a lot of what's in theaters today. Studio filmmaking is increasingly driven by risk aversion. Endless sequels, IP expansions, algorithmic storytelling, not because filmmakers don't care, but because the system prioritizes global box office and not personal vision. A lot of these movies are designed to be familiar and driven more by brand continuity than creative risk. This isn't just a cinephile complaint, it's a structural issue. When profit incentives prioritize recognition over originality, then it's harder for new, weird, emotionally risky films to make it through the system. And that can shape how we engage as viewers. We become more skeptical, more guarded, more detached, not because we don't want to feel, but because we don't trust the film to earn that feeling. Still, the issue isn't just the system. The deeper you move into cinephile culture, the more your viewing habits risk becoming performative. Breaking something down too quickly interrupts emotional absorption. When you treat a film like something to judge right away, you give yourself less space to feel it. This is amplified by platforms like Letterboxd, where your reaction becomes public the moment you hit log. That visibility triggers what psychologists call expressive suppression, which is the tendency to mute authentic feelings when we feel socially observed. And over time, watching through that lens of reaction, justification, identity management makes joy feel something like you have to earn, or worse, explain. The answer isn't to abandon Letterboxd or reject film school. Both can deepen our engagement with cinema in real, meaningful ways. The problem isn't the platforms, it's the posture. For some, that means turning off public ratings. For others, it means logging without reviewing or delaying the log until the emotion has settled. Some people start separate accounts for comfort watches. Others make a rule, no reviews on first watches. Since February, I've stopped leaving ratings unless I think it's a 5-star movie, but I'll still leave the occasional review. And honestly, it's helped. I feel less pressure to evaluate everything I watch and more space to just sit with how it made me feel. These might seem like small changes, but together they reflect on something bigger. They're all ways of unlearning the need to perform and relearning how to receive. It starts with permission to like what you like, even if it wouldn't impress anyone, to be moved by something simple, to watch without composing your reaction in real time, to feel first, and maybe, if it still matters later, articulate why. That's what cinema is for, not just to be understood, but to be felt. If film school and Letterboxd killed anything, it wasn't my love of movies. It was the ease with which I once loved them, instinctively and unapologetically. Over time, that love got filtered through critique, comparison, and self-consciousness. But I don't think that's a failure. I think it's a phase, and I'm learning to come through it with a love that's less about proving taste and more about trusting feeling. So I'm curious, has your relationship with film changed over time? Maybe you felt that shift from immersion to evaluation. And if so, what helped you find your way back?